Welcome to our Becoming Your Best podcast. Wherever you may be in the world today, we have a wonderful international guest today. And before we get started, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about her. She is really spectacular. She's a certified etiquette consultant, author, and content creator. She's written 3 etiquette books: Etiquette, The Least You Need to Know, Afternoon Tea Etiquette, and the art of entertaining at home, and host a popular lifestyle YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers. Way to go. She also regularly hosts etiquette workshops and private coaching sessions with ambassadors, young diplomats, and embassy employees around the world. Welcome, Jamila Musayeva.
Very good, Steve. Very good.
It's been a delight. We've had the chance to visit some before we started the podcast. This is going to be a delightful visit today. We welcome each one of you as our listeners, and in Becoming Your Best, the 12 principles of highly successful leaders, I love principle 10, which is apply the power of knowledge. And if I were to dedicate, all 12 of the principles are wonderful and very powerful and help us be more successful as leaders and do a better job and become our best. But this one, apply the power of knowledge, is huge. And it's something that Jamila has done throughout her life. I love her. She's an inspiration, 33 years old. I'll tell you just a little bit more about her, but I think we will all gain some knowledge today and find some ways to apply it. So Jamila graduated summa cum laude in international affairs at George Washington University before obtaining a master's degree in European political and administrative studies from the College of Europe in Belgium and getting her certification from the International Etiquette and Protocol Academy of London. Well, what a background. I mean, we have brought to you the expert on etiquette today.
Thank
So, based in Azerbaijan, Jamila was raised in a culturally rich environment. She's the mother of 2 children. I think if I got it right, a 6 and a 9-year-old. Is that right?
That's right.
And they're close by. They're being good this morning, listening in. She is fluent in 6 languages, and her global perspective is deeply ingrained in her work. Her profound knowledge of diplomatic protocol, coupled with her mastery of etiquette, good manners, and luxury living, and positions her as a leading figure in the realm of refined behavior. So we've got so much to talk about here, and she is infinitely qualified. So let's just get going from hearing from Jamila. Tell us about your background, including any turning points in your life that's had a significant impact on you.
Thank you so much, Steve, for such a wonderful introduction. I loved it. Thank you for giving pretty much everything that I had to introduce myself with, all the information. In regards to my background, as you mentioned, I was born and raised here in Azerbaijan, which is a small country. Growing up, I was very much exposed to different languages, cultures, religions, traditions. Our country is super tolerant. We just coexist with a lot of minorities, like minority society, like cultural minorities, religious minorities. And growing up, I was exposed to various cultures and also various ways of living and lifestyle. And given that my parents really loved traveling and took me all around the world, I was always exposed to everything around me, other places and other ways of living. So I was naturally a very curious child, interested in other languages as well as others' ways of living. And hence, I think that's where my deep interest in etiquette came from, as to why we live a certain way, why there are certain rules to certain cultures and certain livings. I think my upbringing, my background, the society I was brought up in, as coupled with my education, first in the U.S. and then in Europe, and then also just coming back to Azerbaijan, all of that really influenced my passion for etiquette. I realized that we live differently because of our culture, religion, societal differences. And there is no right or wrong way. There's just some ways that are accepted generally by society. Then there's some deviations from that in terms of, tribal ways of doing it, cultural ways of doing it. So I just kept an open mind when I was learning about others and learning why they lived the way they lived. So I think that was a turning point for me in finding my passion for etiquette and finding my way to this profession today. I never knew that this profession even existed. Actually, when I was doing my international relations degree in GW, we had one master class by an etiquette school of Washington, and we attended this huge workshop, and that's when I realized actually there are people teaching this. I never knew this was something that someone could pursue a career in. So I think that also really ingrained in my memory, and I remembered how I loved that class, and I wanted to do something similar.
Oh, that's wonderful. And tell us about your books just briefly and how they can be of help in this area.
Well, I have three books, if you mentioned earlier. There's an etiquette book, The Least You Need to Know. The inspiration behind this book was that when I finished my etiquette school and I was looking for textbooks to start teaching from, especially the beginners, I realized there was nothing out there in the market. You can tell more about this since you've been, in publishing industry, you probably know this better. But once I did my degree, I wanted to buy a lot of books about etiquette. Some books were either too old school, like they were published back in the days in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of these were outdated. This huge, like big Bible, like this thick books that not a lot of people were willing to buy and read. And then there were some books that were just tiny, like lists, brochures for little kids about manners that were like super simplistic and they weren't really for young adults. So I was looking for something similar, but I couldn't find it. And so I decided to write a book that would be like your basic first book you would have to go to whenever you need to polish your knowledge about etiquette. That's why I called it Etiquette, the least you need to know, or the least like things you have to know in order to get ready to step into society after, after doing your school or graduating from university. Because bear in mind, Steve, school or university doesn't prepare you for life after. That doesn't equip you with skills that you need to have when you're out and about in a professional world, or just a social like world, like when you're meeting people. So that's when the first book came along, and then the afternoon tea etiquette is just about the British tradition of afternoon tea. It's something that I find it very interesting, and it's something I personally love to do and host people over for afternoon tea. So that's the inspiration behind it. And then the art of entertaining at home was actually something that my audience on YouTube asked me to do videos on, how to set up a table, how to host people at home, because a lot of these people are young generation from 18 to 35. So these are the people that maybe didn't entertain a lot of people over at home, especially at pandemic time. No, people have forgotten even the art of entertaining. And so a lot of these requests came from my followers on YouTube, and I realized, why not turn this into a course? So I actually have done an online pre-recorded course called The Art of Entertaining at Home, where I show you how to set up a table, how to do it according to four seasons. And then I decided to write a book on this as well, so that the book and the online course can go together. So you can visually see what I'm explaining, but then you have a book to back it up. That's basically where my book's coming from, the inspiration. And these are the books that you can gift to someone who's just getting started with etiquette.
Oh, I love it. I'm glad I asked that question. It's so interesting and nice work and way to be creative and innovative and to be a way to find a way to use your talents and passion to bless other people. Nice going.
Yeah, I read
So,
somewhere. Sorry for if I like I'm getting away from like now trying to divert the attention, but there was a saying, I think, when I think it was Steve Jobs who once said that give the people, like, create things that you wish existed, or I might be wrong if it was him or not, but create the things that you wish you could use or you wish there were. So a lot of this inspiration of writing these books was because I really wish they were there in the market to begin with, because I was searching for them. So it came from my own need and I fulfilled it with my own skills.
yeah, you're spot on that. Well, let's talk about some etiquette and some styles. And can you explain, Jamila, the difference between direct and indirect communication styles and how these styles can impact business interactions in different cultures?
So if you mean direct, meaning like the more the way Western cultures are dealing business, and the way that it's usually, again, that's why I started this podcast by explaining how culture influenced my desire for etiquette. So some cultures aim to have very clear writing style. They aim to be very direct in their communication. They aim to be as clear as they think the other person deserves to be. So these communication styles are often associated with America. So it's the Western Europe, Australia. So these countries, and culturally, religiously, and mentality wise, they prefer this direct communication, be it in a handshake, be it with a direct eye contact. You never take away the eye contact while handshaking someone, when talking to someone. You can directly say, or you should directly say yes or no, because if this is business meeting, especially if we're talking about business etiquette, your our answer should be clear to your client, or clear to the person you're communicating with. Versus most of Middle Eastern world, most of Asian countries, most of East Asian countries avoid direct communication, be it there's no direct eye contact. A lot of the greeting forms are done in a way that there is no eye contact. For example, Indians do namaste. So when doing namaste, they bow down. The Japanese bow down completely with their hands by their sides and their head tilted towards the floor. So their eye gaze is actually on the floor, not on the person. So you can even see how, based by the greeting style, the communication is the way they communicate is different. So if the West goes for a handshake with a touch to touch, eye to eye, the East goes completely without touching each other. So it's namaste, it's bowing, it's way. So the Taiwan does the way. So it's very different ways of greeting. And there is a huge emphasis on breaking the eye contact if you are keeping it for a duration of time, especially if this is someone above your hierarchy. If this is an elderly person, if this is someone more important than you will never have a direct eye contact for a long period of time. You'll have a short eye contact and break it, because that means you're being aggressive. That means you're being disrespectful, which is the other way around in America or in Western Europe in general. If you are doing business in Japan or China, very rarely you'll ever get an answer as a no, as a like confirmed no. Japanese people always avoid saying no. They will say they will never say no. So if you're doing business with Japan, if you haven't gotten a no, that doesn't mean that it's a yes. It might mean a no, but like camouflaged under a yes, because they want to keep their face. Keeping a face is very important in Japanese culture, and not being aggressive or not, breaking the bridge immediately is very important in Japanese culture. I would say I think it also influences the way business is handled, like between these two, I would say, hemispheres, in a way that um, emphasis is a lot on interpersonal relationships when it comes to Middle East and Asian countries. So before they get to the deal, they invest a lot of time into getting to know the person, investing in interpersonal relationship, trusting the person, building that rapport. Whereas in the US, it's, let's get to the deal, let's get to the business, I'm here for the work. Which is why I guess the way we communicate is also very different. There are non-direct, and this part of the word is more direct. Again, this comes a lot from, again, I think it's built up from the cultural mentality, from the religious mentality that's formed over years, over centuries, really.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking. We've been talking a little bit about becoming your best, the 12 principles. This one, apply the power of knowledge. So important, isn't it? Because it has a big impact on the outcome, the success of your relationships, and and how you're doing, effectiveness in meetings and everything. Another one is principle 5 is live the golden rule in business and in life. And really, this what Jamila is talking about today is taking the time to really be considerate of other people and knowing how they approach relationships, right? And so I love the fact you're talking about these styles and practices that we should be aware of. How do you know? How do you learn this? How can you be considerate of other people?
Well, you just said before, you have to be knowledgeable. In order to be knowledgeable, you have to get that knowledge. And today we live in a world where everything is accessible at our fingertips. Back in the days, you'd have to go to library, find a book on Japan or on the culture. Usually, growing up, actually, I do remember this when we traveled with my parents, say we traveled to Spain, my mom would buy a book about Spain and would make us read about Spain before we came there. So we kind of understood, what language they spoke, what were some, traditional, maybe holidays, maybe dancing, maybe festivals. So we were aware of the culture that we were traveling to see, and also it helped us understand and remember things better because we had read about it and now we were seeing it. So juxtaposing what we saw with what we read, like ingrained in our memory a lot better. So I think now, to answer your question, if they are doing business with Japan, take your time to do your research. Nowadays, with, thank God, chat GDP is available. GPT is not GDP. GPT is giving you answers to everything, but always double check because there's a lot of misinformation on that as well. I would say go for books, published articles, or maybe ebooks that you can find online if you can't go out to your library, and find books on culture, or find books on the country you want to learn more about. Because you can start off a relationship by a bad impression, and there is no way you can amend that afterwards. You can make, like, your first impression really matters, especially when you are doing business. If your mission is to make a good impression from the very first go on, then you have to take your time, do your research, become knowledgeable about the culture you're dealing with.
Oh, I know a good book written by Jamila Musayeva on etiquette that people can get.
Yes.
That's good. Well, that's a good answer on your part. I appreciate that. All right. So, what are some key considerations for meeting etiquette in different cultures? Some things we should be aware of.
So, most importantly, the first thing that you have to be aware of when you're greeting other people from different cultures. And Steve, you can observe this actually when you're watching a G7 summit, G20 summit, when presidents from all over the world are greeting each other. The very first thing when it comes to business etiquette is the greeting style. Every culture greets people differently. As I mentioned earlier, handshake has actually become a more common way of greeting. So it has become a sort of international standard of greeting across the countries. So if we're talking about handshake, we're going for a firm handshake, which is, web to web. So these are parts of our hand, web to web, 2 to 3 pumps, elbows at 90 degrees. These are like the common rules for a good handshake. Continuous eye contact, 2 to 3 pumps, and then break it. And it's important that your hands are out of your pocket. So the other hand that is, greeting is in motion, but the other hand should be out of your pocket. You never leave it in your pocket. So handshake would be, the standard way. But then also consider other ways of greeting people. If you're doing business with Japanese people, you will be bowing. The degree of your bow will depend on the hierarchy that you occupy towards that person. So say you're greeting your employee, it's different than when you're greeting your employer. So if you're greeting your
Hmm.
employer, your bow should be lower than his or hers because you want to show that you are more respectful towards them. So whoever's bow is lower, that means they're paying more respect to the other person. There is no eye contact
Okay.
in a bow. With namaste and your palms are towards each other by your chest, you do a little head tilt up. So there is a short eye contact, but it's broken. That's an Indian way of greeting. In Middle East, a man should not greet a woman unless she has extended her hand for a handshake. You never generally extend your hand for a handshake as a man first, especially if it's a social etiquette. In business, you'd wait for women as well, because if this is a Muslim woman, maybe a religious woman from a Jewish background, you want to be safe. So allow the woman to extend her hand for a handshake first. And then we're looking for, the way of greeting in Middle East. Men in Middle East tend to greet by cheek kiss. So, or they'll just rub their basically noses towards each other, depending if it's UAE. So, a close, I guess, nose touch is the right way to explain this. But this will occur if they know you well and if you're from the same region. They will not obviously greet a foreigner like that. Foreigner will be greeted with a handshake. There's a lot of patting on the shoulder. There's a lot of patting on the back. There's some embracing happening. In Europe, for example, especially in France, the greeting will be, very tight hug. You can watch this with the heads of state, and it was back Angela Merkel. The way she used to hug Macron was like super intimate. They would hug each other, do kisses on the cheek a few times, which is not the way she greeted any other leader. So she was changing her greeting style according to the leader that she was meeting. I've actually done extensive analysis of this, showing how one person can greet different heads of states differently based on their cultural background. You'll never see her, you would have never seen her do that, say, with a Turkish PM. And an interesting thing I wanted to bring your attention to, Steve, back in the days when Obama was a president, he was visiting Japan. And on his tour, he actually went to greet the PM of Japan. And he went for a handshake and a bow. So he was bowing and handshaking at the same time, which created a lot of noise in media because, they were saying how he bowed lower than the American flag. There was like a diplomatic protocol that was broken there. But also, you can't do two styles together. You can either bow or handshake because these are contradictory greeting styles.
Oh, that's great. It's so interesting. And as business and interactions become increasingly digital, how can professionals ensure that they're still respecting cultural nuances and maintaining effective cross-cultural communication?
I think it's again, it comes down with to what we were talking about earlier. It's about education, knowledge, um,
Hmm.
equipping yourself with knowledge. If you're doing mostly digital communication with people from other cultures, you can get, a coaching session or an advice from someone perhaps from same culture, asking what is the right way of handling communication. One thing I wanted to note again when it comes to business is, for example, punctuality. It's a very different culture from culture to culture. In the West, 6 p.m. means 6 p.m. There is nothing. If someone scheduled a meeting at 6, it's at 6. In Arab countries, most of Middle Eastern countries, 6 p.m. can be going anywhere from 6 until 7. So really, they have this liberty of time. There's this mentality,
Whoa.
if God wants, it will happen. So there's no need to rush for things, You have this much more leisurely expectation. And actually, I would say this is true for it's also dependent on climate. A lot of people from warmer regions, from warmer countries like Latin America, Italy, Middle East, these people tend to take time more leisurely than people from northern hemisphere. Is because I don't know, maybe it's because of the sunlight exposure. People were more careful with making everything on schedule. Versus in warmer countries where the sun is always out, the idea was, we'll eventually make it. If not 6, we'll meet at 7. I have found a lot of clients that would get offended when they were dealing with clients from Middle East or from Asia that would show up later than they have scheduled, and they would get into this misunderstanding. And the point here is to come without any expectations. Leave your understanding of punctuality aside if you're trying to work with people from other culture, and try to put yourself into their mentality, that they're not doing it to offend you personally. They're not doing this to they're not doing it because they're not respecting your time. This is their way of living, and that's important to understand.
Are you saying that if we set up a meeting at 6 p.m., you may have some cultures that say, hold it, what that means is 6 to 7, maybe?
Yes, it could mean
I
that it's
love it.
6 to 7. Yes,
Ah,
yes.
that's important to know so you don't get upset and you can just kind of go with the flow and get down to what's important and create the relationship and respect them and then get to work, right?
Exactly, exactly. It's the most important thing, Steve, here is not to take things personal. I remember when my client was first dealing with most of his clients in Middle East, he'd get really personal, like, I flew all over the country. I set up a meeting. We were supposed to be there and they weren't. And I said, listen, this is not because they're not respecting your time. This is because this is just their way of handling their own schedule. And you have to understand that this is a thing and a mentality. It has nothing to do with you. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's great. And what are some of the most common etiquette mistakes a person can make, a professional, and how can they avoid them?
Oh, there are a lot of mistakes that can be made. I think a lot of them again have to do with cultural nuances that are something that needs to be studied in order to be avoided. But I would say in business etiquette, one of the most common things that I've seen happen, again from my clients' case studies, is that you know a man would extend his hand for a handshake to a woman at a business meeting, and a woman, due to her cultural, religious, or personal preferences, did not extend her hand back, which left the man, already ashamed, with his hand hanging, didn't know what to do, didn't know where to put it. So this would be, I think, number one, like big mistake when it came, not mistake, but I guess misunderstanding when it came to who does what first. Also, introductions. People are often shy of introducing each other, and they're always hesitant as to who has to be introduced to whom. If you were an employee and you have to introduce your employer to your VIP client, who do you introduce to whom? And that's a big dilemma, because your employer is very important for you, he's your boss, but so is your VIP client. So the idea here is that if this is a client who is in your business, in your firm, in your company, who came to your, to your office place, here the VIP client would be your guest of honor. He would be the most, or he, she would be the most important person. And the way you would introduce is always pronounce the name of the most important person first. So you would then
Mm.
name your client, say John, Mr. John Smith, may I introduce to you my boss, Mr. David, I don't know, Clarks. So it's
Yeah.
important to first pronounce the name of the most important person, then say, may I introduce to you, not you to, because that reverses the places. If you say, may I introduce you to, it means you're introducing your client to your boss. So now your boss has an sort of is an upper hand, but you have to do the other way around. So you make your client feel a lot more special. Then may I introduce to you, and then you introduce your former boss. It's important to give something, some information about your boss or your client. So our long lasting or long, I don't know, like long long in our office, I don't know, has been here for 20 years, is one of the best, I don't know, bosses, very I don't know, loves hockey. And then you give some information about your client that potentially can help them to have a, something to start a conversation about. So your client also
Hmm.
loves hockey, your boss loves, so you throw that in and then allow them to start having a conversation about that topic. So introductions is also a huge important part when it comes to business etiquette. Also, dress codes is a huge thing. I've seen a lot of mishaps in business etiquette when it came to dress codes, and that also differed from culture to culture. How Western Europe views formal dress code a lot more serious than in the US. Lately,
Mm.
especially in the US, the business casual has taken over. So jeans and polo shirts, and some I've seen some people wear like sneakers to work. So things have changed in the US. Whereas if you are, in Italy, in France, an office wear is still very much business formal. So if you're doing business, you fly into Europe, definitely don't show up in your sneakers and your, um, just a polo and your like regular pants. Try to dress up one notch up when you're in Europe or Middle East, because still it's very much about formality. If you're doing business in Asia, in Japan, especially in China, they are very formal in their dress code, still up until today, which is not something that you can see much in the US. There are a lot we can cover in terms of mistakes.
Well, that's a good start. And Jamila and I were visiting a little bit about one of my first companies when I was a young entrepreneur, and I bought a printing and a publishing company. We produced children's books, and one of the sets we produced was the Winter series, and we one of the books was named "Winning is Having Good Manners,"
It is.
and it is. So, at any rate, I was thinking about that. I'd be interested in this one because it may be different in the world, but in the U.S., anyhow, people who are sitting at a table aren't sure when they should start eating when the food is delivered. And what we discovered, whether it's right or wrong, is that good etiquette is if there's six or less, you wait for everybody to have their food delivered. Then you start eating. But if there's more than six, like eight, then you can start on your food when it's delivered.
It is true. It is true with a small remarks that I want to add. If the host or hostess has unfolded the napkin and placed it on her or his lap, even though the rest of the guests say it's six of you, should be six of you, only three arrived, but she sat at a table, unfolded the napkin on her lap, that means it's a green flag to start. That's the gesture that
Woohoo!
shows let's start. That rule from six and above that you can start applies to formal dining experiences where the host is not seated together with you. You know, it's a wedding, they're somewhere out there. You have individual, tables, you're seated with some friends. You can start eating once all of people have been served. But if this is a long table, it will, your food will get cold by the time everyone is served. So you'll start eating as soon as the people around you, so to your right, your left, and in front of you, have been served and started eating. So that's when you start eating too.
Okay, well, great. Well, this has been a fun interview. I cannot believe it. We're at the end of our visit today. It's gone just like lightning. And any final tips you'd like to leave with our listeners today, Jamila?
I just want to finish off, Steve. Thank you first and foremost for this opportunity to talk to your audience. But I also want to leave them with the last thought that I had when you said winning is having good manners or having, is knowing etiquette. And, I want to all your listeners that are listening right now, I want to say how manners still matter a lot. We might not necessarily understand them as manners, or we might not necessarily be able to think of them as manners, but this is a holistic approach to how we want to represent ourselves in the best possible light. It's not just about what we wear. It's not just about how we walk. It's not just about how we talk. It's a comprehensive study of everything. So starting from the way we groom ourselves, the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we hold ourselves, and it is the one thing that will make you stand out from the crowd. So if five guys have their diplomas from the same Ivy schools, if there's one guy that has best manners, that has the best way to represent himself, he will get it. He will get the best job. He'll get the best opportunity. Because at the end of the day, when the school is over, it's then up to us, our personal skills, our behavior that carves our way to the opportunities that we get in life. So it's really important that you still take account of your manners. And if you have not been lucky enough to learn it in your younger adulthood, then it's never late. You can still learn it and you can still become your best possible self.
Yay. Oh, what a great interview and great information that you've shared and knowledge that you've shared. How can people find out about what you're doing, Jamila?
Steve, they can follow me on YouTube, where, as you mentioned, I have over 1 million subscribers now on my channel. They can find me on my website, which is jamilamusayeva.com. They can, get my books on there. They can join my pre-recorded online etiquette courses that they can view at their own, disposal whenever they have time. And they can also book workshops or master classes with me or online coaching, as well as I have actually a Patreon etiquette movie club, which is a very unique content where every month I analyze different Hollywood movies from or Hollywood or European movies from an etiquette standpoint of view. So it's analysis of movies from an etiquette viewpoint. And it's something unique. I think there are no digital creators that do that. So it's a very unique content, and they can find it on my Patreon Etiquette Movie Club.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jamila Musayeva,
Yes.
for being a part of our show today. It's been wonderful, and I know that I am going to be better because of it, and I'm excited to read your books and to learn more. And we wish you all the best in what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for having me. And thank you for doing what you're doing, because I think it's so helpful for people to always improve and be the best version of themselves. Thank you.
You bet. And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining. We wish you the best. We're grateful for your influence, for your desires to make a difference in the world for good. This is Steve Schallenberger wishing you a great day.